had the opportunity to speak to Craig Laurance Gidney, one of the co-editors for Essential Dream Press's upcoming Tanith Lee inspired anthology. Please enjoy the interview. Craig is an award-winning author of contemporary and genre fiction, with his most recent published short fiction being The Nectar of Nightmares. Thank you so much for joining me today, Craig.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. So, are you ready to jump into the questions?
Yeah, sure. Shoot.
All right. So the first one we have is, how has Tanith Lee affected your approach to fiction writing?
Well, when I was, I'd say about 18 or so, I found her work in a bookstore. And one of the things that sort of blew me away about her writing was, first of all, it was just absolutely gorgeous to read. So there's the pleasure of actually it being a piece of prose. And I think a lot of writers these days sort of are just like story, 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 and not so much language, language, language. And I'm sort of in between the two. And I was sort of shocked at the fact that she was allowed to do that. The other thing that really influenced me was the fact that she had a lot of alternative sexuality in her stories too. And I don't think I'd read very much stuff like that. I mostly had read stuff like Tolkien, where there's absolutely no sex at all, to a lot of fantasy, which is, um, a lot of objectified women and things like that. So it was interesting to read a story that had where everyone was default bisexual. And the thing that sort of shocked me was at being 18 was I was just like, are you allowed to do this? That was kind of what my influence was that I was like, are you allowed to do this? Wow, you actually can do this. And she became sort of an important building block, along with Samuel Delany and Octavia Butler for different reasons.
Yeah, well, that's a great answer. I know a big lure of Tanith Lee's writing is her alternative sexuality that wasn't present back then. So I think that,
Actually,
yeah.
she was one of the people who was banned in there used to be these mall bookstores called Walden Books, and I forget what the other one was, Crown Books or something like that. And they actually banned her from being in those stores because her books were too open with their sexuality.
Wow, that's incredible. I had no idea. Well, thank you for sharing that tidbit. Yeah, she really has had a varied career.
Yeah.
Um, So my next work, or not my next work, my next question for you is both your work and Tanith Lee's has been described by reviewers as defying genre. Can you discuss your relationship with genre and how it affects or doesn't affect your writing process?
Well, I think a lot of her work sort of exists in the in between spaces, meaning that she doesn't follow many of the rules that, this is strictly science fiction, this is strictly horror, this is strictly fantasy. She kind of has an internal logic to the stories and sort of follows the story rather than appealing to genre conventions. And I would say that that's kind of my approach as well. My fiction tends to be more driven by the characters and their sort of internal landscapes, and not so much in terms of strict magic systems and things like that. I admire those sorts of things, but I found myself that I kind of view fantasy as being a way to get at deeper truths and deeper emotional truths rather than um, rather than just being sort of strictly logical. I also love her work with dream logic, in that a lot of her plots have a sort of dream fairy tale aspect to it that if you look at it purely from the viewpoint of the character, it makes sense. But if you sort of look at it with a microscope and you're just like, well, that technically doesn't really happen in the real world. I kind of love that sort of aspect of her writing, and that's kind of how I approach my thing towards fantasy and science fiction and horror.
Yeah, well, that's great. I know she really does kind of go outside the bounds of what is expected today, and I'm sure when she first started as well. So I think it's great that you're continuing that tradition, because I think that is still subversive today. People still expect to be reading something within one category. So it's great that you're breaking out of that.
Right.
Yeah. So my next question is, you have stated that you were writing long before your first work was published. Has your perspective on writing changed since you've been published?
Absolutely. One of the things that I've noticed is that when before I started publishing, there used to be the rule of one, which is that you already had Octavia Butler for the Black author. You already had Samuel Delany for the Black gay author. And these sorts of stories and characters that you could write about was very boxed in. And now it's completely different. Now you can have more than one female author, more than one gay author, more than one Asian author. And I absolutely love the fact that it has kind of expanded. Um, One of the things that has also happened, unfortunately, is that there is a backlash, and there was an entire movement to keep the woke out of this is even before woke was a term, but woke out of fantasy. And they think that the existence of sort of an autistic character is pandering to an audience, whereas they exist. So why wouldn't they exist in, say, a science fictional setting? And I absolutely love the fact that people are sort of I also love the smashing between genre fiction and sort of mainstream fiction. If you read mainstream fiction now, it it's absolutely okay to have ghosts and have sort of magical realist elements. If you look at something like Kelly Link, for instance, I was about to say Kelly Clarkson, but if you look at Kelly Link, um, her stuff is considered mainstream, but it's all full of weird things happening. Um, so that sort of line has sort of been demarcated, and I love the fact that that's been the case. The bad part of it is, of course, is that there's more competition because of that. So that's that. But the thing is, I would rather have more competition rather than just have, tightly subscribed stories that can only be told by one person.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting you said that people feel that it's pandering if there are autistic or, gay characters in science fiction, when I feel like science fiction, you have the opportunity to really expand what, you know, is in the world today. So I think, yeah, I think that's a very um interesting argument that people have that can really be debunked. And I'm glad you brought that up, because yeah.
Right. And a lot of fantasy and science fiction, if you look particularly in media, it's slowly seeping into media itself. For instance, in the Lord of the Rings series called Rings of Power, they actually had elves and dwarves of color. And of course, people were just like, no, Tolkien would not want that. But actually, that's not the case, I don't think, if you look back at who he taught and what he taught. Um, or they did that with the Foundation series too, which is that the Foundation was basically excuse the term, a sausage party, meaning that women were mostly there to be supportive and all that, but they moved that series so that women of color are the ones that are the drivers of the plot. So I love the fact that things are sort of expanding, and it's sort of the way that I grew up with all sorts of people in my neighborhood. You know, there were Buddhists, there were Jewish people, there were, to me, sort of diversity was the default rather than the shocking intrusion.
Yeah, definitely. I think we still have a ways to go with the public perception.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, that's a great answer. My last question is there anything you can share with me about any upcoming projects you may have?
Well, right now I'm sort of struggling and slash writing a a, uh, a novel that is kind of going to be about it's what I call my crazy angel novel. So it's about biblically accurate angels and a small sort of community in DC, and a kind of cult that is built around them. And so I'm kind of slowly inching my way through it. And it's a lot of exploratory surgery in terms of figuring out how to tell the story. Because part of it is told from a creature that isn't even particularly human. So it's difficult to figure out how to do that.
Writing is definitely an uphill battle sometimes.
Yes,
But I'm
absolutely.
sure we will all be very excited to see what comes out of that. And but that's all for me. Thank you so much for joining me for this interview today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.